Morning charts today. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Friday, the 30th of November, comes to you from London. And we start by looking at the opening in Europe, and just a little bit lower on the markets this morning, but not much. The US fell away last night a little bit as well. Looking at the dollar, we're just back into this sort of negative territory at the moment on the short-term chart, but the medium and long-term charts are still looking bullish. Dollar just hitting some long-term resistance probably. Euro looking a little bit stronger against that weaker dollar on the euro dollar, but dollar actually is just holding on against the yen. So I expect this trend to be short-lived in the short term. Sterling still's uncertainty surrounding Brexit is just weighing on sterling, and we do have these downside targets. 122 seems to be a likely place for sterling to go to against the dollar with those downside targets. And looking against the euro, we see sterling is lower as well. So sentiment is weighing heavily on the UK currency, down against the Swiss franc, and against the Aussie dollar, we're in bearish territory as well. Looking at Bitcoin, down a further 1.6% this morning, holding on to its bullish short-term trend, but the medium and long-term charts still look pretty worrying. Looking at the S&P 500, it was down very slightly last night, just holding on to the transition to bullish. We need a better day today, really, to end the week back into short-term bullish territory. The Nasdaq actually is in short-term bullish territory, but medium-term still looks bearish. And the Dow actually just managing to move into that short-term bullish territory with a 7% upside target. We haven't seen one of those for a while on the short-term chart. So looking quite good. I say that we haven't seen one of those for a while on the short-term chart. We did actually see one off the bottom. That's where we got to and paused. We got a new upside target. Notice how this upside target was met as well. The targets on the Dow are quite reliable. We do still have this target 6% lower hanging over us. So it's a fairly mixed picture. The Russell 2000 index also looking a bit better short-term. The futures this morning down 0.25%. So it does look like the US for the moment will open lower today, and that's trade fears just really still hanging over the market. The Nasdaq E-mini down 0.25% as well. Looking at the FTSE 100, as I mentioned, we're down slightly this morning, just holding on to the bullish short-term territory, although we do have this short-term resistance hanging over us. Looking at the 250, mid caps in the UK, we're looking a little bit better there, and the DAX is down slightly. CAC 40 is actually up 0.4%, bucking the trend. France still looking better than many other markets. Japan up 0.5%. Hang Seng and China up 0.8%. So China up a bit, but still bearish on all three time frames. And the Sensex very slightly down. The Aussie market actually down 1.5%. So looking weaker there. Brent crude is up 0.2%, but still bearish. WTI is down 0.27% and still bearish. So no big recovery there in Europe. In crude oil, U.S. nat gas holding on to that $4.60 level, so that big gain just being held on to. And if we look at gold, we're sitting steady at 0.3%, and silver actually also just holding on to its bullish trend for now. U.S. 10-year yields just sitting at that 3.02% level, and interestingly, we've got targets now to 296, so it does suggest that we will see moves lower. Taking a look at the data coming from Yahoo this morning, we see the US markets all down last night, Europe down slightly, so we are seeing quite a lot of red. Japan bucking the trend, and as is Hang Seng and Shanghai. If we look at the Nasdaq overnight, we saw some quite big falls, but we saw Alphabet was up 0.25%, Amazon up down 0.25%, Apple, which is the one we've been watching, down 0.77%. So we are seeing quite big moves there, and Apple is really the big worry at the moment for the market. Microsoft down just under 1%, and Netflix actually bucking the trend up 2%, and Tesla was down nearly 2%. So quite a mixed picture, no clear trend in the market at the moment. The Aussie market was mostly weaker. We saw some quite big performances there Coca-Cola until down 14%, Aristocrat Leisure down 7%. So we are seeing still quite big fall-offs there. China was up quite sharply. Very few stocks down in China, just 4 stocks down. And in Hang Seng we see again mostly a sea of green, a handful of stocks lower. Nifty 50 pretty evenly split, more falling than rising. Hindustan Petroleum down 5%, so some quite big falls there, and bearish charts to see. And Tokyo was up. Looking at Europe at the open, again, this is data all coming from Yahoo Finance. You see the FTSE 100 was down slightly, where you saw, and we do have AAL up 3%, BAE Systems up just under 1%. But interestingly, it's the fallers, and we're seeing Sage down 2%, Bats down 2%. So we are seeing some quite big falls here. Aviva down 1.6%, Glencore also down 1.5%. Lots of charts going through this bearish transition, so the market really isn't looking great. Looking at the 250, Vivo Energy up 3%, but Thomas Cook, its woes continue. A terrible week here we see on the weekly chart after that profits warning and that profits announcement, and underperforming the market by some 70% versus the Dow Jones. So Thomas Cook's had a terrible year. Looking at the Euro stocks, we've got Alliance Europe up 11%, so that's the strongest performer, though the chart is all over the place. In Germany, GAE up 0.75%. AAL we talked about. Argenx up 2.68%. Looking on the other end of the scale, we've got Ambu down 6%, and in Paris, Florica down 5%. So we are still seeing some pretty big falls in a number of stocks in the market. That's it for today. We hope for a steady day on the US market, but futures suggest we're probably going to see a lower. Until Monday, happy charting. See you then.